Hello, hello. This is LA Russell Chick, and we're going to do something that I've been wanting to do for a very long time. 2 days after I had my surgery, if you know, you know, is when I found out that early in the morning that I found out Hulk Hogan passed away. He was very pivotal in my life. I grew up with Hulk Hogan, and he one of the things that I wanted to do was to meet him, go down to Florida at his store and meet him. And sadly, I waited too long. So that's that. But here we're going to discuss his injuries, a lot of his injuries. I have to say, his injuries are probably worse than Sabu, especially with the type of wrestling they did. There's no comparison. But some of the things that he went through is just completely astronomical. So we're going to be covering all the health issues and rumored health issues of the immortal Hulk Hogan. It is important to note that Hulk Hogan was not just a wrestler or a character, but a media super brand that brought wrestling out of obscurity into the mainstream. He was forced Terry Bollea was forced to live to this superhuman standard, this superhuman brand for over 30 years. Even when he got older, he really wasn't allowed to retire that gimmick and let it rest. For context, you could look at Ric Flair. Ric Flair, you don't see him do all the the rah 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 that he is known for and we love him for. I love watching those old tapes of Ric Flair. But he's calmed down. Hulk Hogan was never really allowed to lay it to rest and be done with it. So after doing research on this topic, all I could say is that the man was in a lot of pain. And he put a big smile on his face and would go out to that ring and perform, and he was in a lot of pain. I know there's people that'll say this, say that, blah, 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 but that man stayed in the character no matter how much he was in pain. He went out to that ring, he did his job, he pleased millions without a hitch. Nowadays, you got folks that when they stub their toe, they don't want to do anything. So I really do appreciate him for that. Now, sadly, a lot of the health rumors were true. And again, I'm going to say that his body was probably worse than Sabu. So let's start with between the 1980s and the 1990s when he was in the prime of his career. Now, I do believe he came into wrestling right around 79 or so. Of course, this would be back in Florida. But and he was in the AWA and all of that. He was really green. Now, during this time, the 1980s and 1990s, he broke his nose at least 13 times. If you've noticed any of these movement in his nose, please let me know. He always looked perfect. I can say he always looked perfect from beginning to end. Look at Shawn Michaels. Shawn Michaels looked like he's been rode too hard and left out wet compared to how he looked in the beginning. Okay, eye orbital reconstruction from being struck. Now, I remember there's been at least one of these reconstructions across his eye was when he did a tour in Japan. That would have been early in the career, but there's been at least several more times from interviews that he said he had to get his eye orbital reconstructed again. Teeth knocked out on numerous occasions. Now, you can see some pictures, and I did find two pictures of him where it looked like he had normal teeth, but from then on, it's all implants or dentures or something along those lines. And as he aged, you could really tell his teeth really started to look like chiclets. They're just super white, and you could tell something was up with his teeth. But again, his teeth always looked impeccable, or he always tried to maintain that super brand, that super perfect image. Now, bicep tears and muscle injuries. Now, one of these is he was very famous for was during WrestleMania 3 when he was in 1987 when he fought Andre the Giant. Now, the thing with that is Andre the Giant was in a lot of pain in that match, and his weight, because he was ill, his weight would fluctuate between 5 and 600 pounds. So this was not the first time Hogan has picked up and tossed Andre to the ground. And fun fact, lots of people had slammed Andre. I mean, Kamala, Ernie Ladd, Bad News Brown, Anoki in Japan. I mean, this was not a big deal. This was done all the time. Probably the real big difference here is that Andre was a lot heavier because he was ill. So when he flipped Andre, slammed Andre, he tore both arm biceps and he also hurt his back. And there is some video of where he showed that he never got his biceps fixed or reconnected or however that works, but you could definitely see a deformity if he moves his arm just the right way. Also, this was the beginning stages of developing spinal damage due to the bane of his existence, the atomic leg drop as his finishing move. We always looked for that atomic leg drop. And when you would slam on the ground, slam on the person, it wasn't the person on the ground that was getting the pain. It was Hulk Hogan because he was actually falling on his tailbone. The person just had this big leg coming on him, but it was the tailbone, and then the mats were very hard in the early 80s. If you ask me, I think the mats are hard now, but back then, the mats were real hard, and he kept day in and day out hitting his L4, L5, and what would be the S1 vertebrae. So below your curve, which is your lumbar, the last two, and then the total curve, if you're familiar with anatomy, uh, that would be going into your curved bottom part. So that's been the bane of his existence. So now moving on to the 2000s. Well, right before the 2000s, you have in 1994 was the WWF steroid trial, where he publicly had to admit that he was using steroids. His statements were, and he emphasized this, he used steroids under medical supervision and that he used them to maintain his size and strength for wrestling. Again, trying to maintain that super wrestling brand that brought wrestling out of obscurity, the back smoky halls, of a barn into the main front, and he was the poster child. I mean, I can't think of anybody right now that would have been able to shoulder all that and carry that and move with that. So again, I just don't think people give Hulk Hogan a lot of credit for that. They look at all this other stuff that he supposedly did, and uh, you know, That normally comes along when you're the top dog. But I just don't think people give him a lot of credit for having to shoulder all of this. So 2000s, in the 2000s. So we have in 2006, 2007, ongoing hip and knee issues beginning to limit his mobility. And eventually that becomes a reoccurring theme because of, guess what? This leg drop that he has to do all the time. Uh, why he never decided to change that particular maneuver to something else, because he was a big boy all his life. I mean, I think he was saying that he was close to 200 pounds, and he was still in middle school. So he was always meant to be a big boy. Now, in 2009, Hogan publicly admits that he has a reliance on prescription painkillers. Again, this is a sort of a re, re a a reoccurring theme here. Now, let us not forget here that in 2000, we're kind of going out of order here. In 2000, he officially departs WCW after several disputes with management and creative direction. And after leaving WCW, he returned to the WWE in 2002 for a few years before semi retiring. And still, then he's having all these issues. Now, just important to note, in 2001, his father, Peter Petro Balea, passed away at the age of 88, which could have also brought some angst for him. Now, in 2010 and 2011, he goes under a traditional spinal fusion surgery. That's not cute. That's really not cute. In 2011, he suffers complications, several additional black back procedures to follow. 2012, had to have an implant tack removed, a dental implant tack removed, because it was left in his mouth. So this is more like he was at the dentist and he was getting his teeth redone, and they actually just left something in his mouth that was supposed to be removed after the procedure was over with. Not cute again. And he also continued with a series of hip and knee replacements. So basically, it's been reported that Hulk Hogan was practically full of metal and steel, and everything has been replaced by the mid 2000s, 2012, 2013. Everything, probably from the waist down, has all been replaced, removed. So more or less like a cyborg now, a robot. Okay, his shoulders had to be repaired and other joint cleanups. And Hogan had stated on a podcast, I remember this, that he begins to visibly lose height. So he was originally billed as 6'7", and now he's lost about 3.5 inches to 6'4.5". Wow. 2016 to 2020, undergoes another orbital and facial surgery due to rustling issues. More back operations to address hardware fails and degeneration. So everything that was done previously is now falling apart and failing, and he's probably having a very difficult time walking around. Now, keep in mind, he did do wrestling matches here and there, which more or less contributed to this. Now, also during this time, Hogan admits to getting into pain pills, painkillers again. So 2021, his daughter Brooke confirms that her father has had over 25 surgeries in the past decade, including both shoulders operated on, an elbow scope, both knees and hips replaced several times. He performed WrestleMania 18. That was when he went up against The Rock, and he had both of his knees and hips were replaced. And he was just sailing around the ring like nothing hurt, nothing ever happened. Tell me somebody else that's done that. You can say what you want about him, personally wise, but work ethic, I mean, who else has done that? He's had multiple back surgeries. He even had the MRSA infection from complications, which is a little bacteria that lives on the skin for a while. So he was down and had to get that taken care of. Now, in 2023 and 2024, he appears on the Impulsive podcast with Logan Paul. Again, he made the claim of 25 surgeries in 10 years. He notes that he's quit drinking alcohol. He tells Chris Van Vliet, I'm not sure, I'm not pronouncing that name correctly, that he's lost 3 inches of height due to discompression, confirming that again. Now, something that not a lot of people may know is that Hogan stated in interviews that he had had a pacemaker and a defibrillator put in to help regulate his heart. That man who is much older but still has that perfect tan and still looking good has a pacemaker in his heart. Now, this is rumored, but it's stated that he also had stents put into his heart. So if you're having stents put in your heart, that means that your arteries are clogged up or are clogging up. So from my experience, they normally don't put stents in if you're under 60% clogged. They won't put them in. But so this says that if he had that put in, his arteries were significantly clogged up to 70% or more. Rumors circulated that Hogan had undergone procedures to clear blocked arteries, which would be the stents. Uh, but these rumors are consistent with a history of hypertension and AFib fibrillation. So May 2025, Hogan undergoes a 4-level anterior cervical discectomy and fusion, which is a major neck surgery. TMZ reports minor, and a quick recovery, but no, something like this is major, and there's nothing quick, there's nothing easy. It's really, really major surgery. July 2024 to July 2025, sorry. He suffered a heart attack at home. He was privately suffering from chronic lymphocytic leukemia, CLL, which is a cancer that affects the white blood cells. And August 2025, reports indicate that Hogan's phrenic nerve which controls the diaphragm and is essential for breathing, was compromised during his earlier procedure. An occupational therapist that was present at the time suggested the nerve was severed, leading to respiratory failure, which led to a heart attack happening and the pictures that you saw on TV. And I was in a hospital bed when this happened, looking at this. So Hulk Hogan led a very, very robust and painful life. His work ethic is phenomenal, especially with all the health issues that he's had. So again, I don't think people give him enough credit. They just rather run and talk about all these other ancillary. He did this, he did that, la la la. When you're the big guy on campus, everything you do is noticed. Everybody's going to say something because they feel like it or want to. So that's kind of how I see things. So, okay, this is all the rumored health problems, health issues of Hulk Hogan. If you know of something else, let me know that I may have missed. Please let me know, and I'll be happy to report it. LA Russell Chick.